Hello. So I shared a documentary some time ago called Willowbrook. And this is the second one after that. I think it's supposed to happen 10 years after, and then there's a third one that happened 25 years after on updating. So, we're going to check this out.
Ten years ago this week, a young television reporter named Geraldo Rivera began a 10-part investigative series on station WABC-TV in New York City. His subject was the inhumane warehousing of mentally retarded people in an institution called Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. The series made news media history, and it was one of the reports that had a lot to do with changes in mental institutions across the country. Now, as one of 2020's regulars, Geraldo has taken a new look at the situation and what the changes have been in the last 10 years. Geraldo?
Thanks, here. The news business is often accused of being fickle, of having a very short attention span, but that has not happened with this story. In the 10 years since the original report, the United States, as you know, has gone through 4 presidents. The Vietnam War ended, the energy crisis began, and the world changed. But how much has Willowbrook and the way America cares for the mentally retarded really changed? This report starts where I started 10 years ago, inside one of the wards of that New York City institution for the mentally retarded. From the original report, quote, "There was one attendant for perhaps 50 severely and profoundly retarded children. Lying on the floor naked and smeared with their own feces, they were making a pitiful sound, a kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget. This is what it looked like. This is what it sounded like. But how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death." End quote.
Is that typical of ward life? Yes, there are 5,300 patients at Willowbrook, which is the largest institution for the mentally retarded in the world. The ones that we saw were the most severely and profoundly retarded. There are thousands there like that, not going to school, sitting on the ward all day, not being talked to by anyone, fighting for the attention of the attendants who are overworked trying to clean them, feed them, clothe them, and if possible pay little attention to them and work with them and develop their intelligence. But what in fact happens is that they go downhill.
The pace of change has been agonizingly slow, but this place has changed. Willowbrook today, as you'll soon be seeing, is relatively speaking a much improved place. To find out exactly what is new here and what isn't, we came back with a real expert. Some of you might even remember him. He spent 18 years here, unnecessarily. His name is Bernard Tarabello.
How is it living on the ward that you live? So describe it.
This is Bernard 10 years ago. Committed to Willowbrook, he spent 18 years amidst the bedlam and chaos of institutional life. Like thousands of other people living in institutions at that time, he had no business being there. A victim of cerebral palsy at the age of 3, he had been misdiagnosed as mentally retarded. Although he is obviously physically handicapped, there is nothing at all wrong with Bernard's mind. This is Bernard today.
Do you ever feel real bitter about the 18 years you lost?
Yeah. Yes and no. I don't walk around. I mean, I cannot stay good all my life because it will eat me up inside of me and tear me apart. And I think I will start to lose my friends. I have to look forward for the future. And I mean, at night when I'm home by myself, this is gonna sound stupid, because, just to get the hostility out of me.
The hostile feelings of wasting so much time.
Yeah.
Since leaving Willowbrook 10 years ago, Bernard has been appointed to the Consumer Advisory Board. That's a watchdog group monitoring improvements and continuing problems at the institution. So he was well qualified to lead our tour. We had informed New York State officials we were coming, but to ensure we saw things as they really are, we came a day earlier than expected and discovered frantic efforts to improve the cosmetic appearance of the place on the eve of our announced visit. New mattresses were being brought in. Late in the afternoon, at the time they're usually being made ready for their evening meal, the ward residents were being taken for an unusual walk. The attempted cover-up became even more apparent when we went inside Bernard's old home, building number 7. A team of plasterers, painters, and steam cleaners were obviously getting the place ready for the cameras. Informed by the building staff that we had arrived 24 hours earlier than expected, Willowbrook's latest director, Dr. Ella Curry, hurried over to Building 7, insisting that what we were seeing was just normal maintenance. Bernard knew better.
Cleaning of the floor, yes.
Every day.
We have to clean the floor to the clients out of the building.
Every day.
There are maybe isolated cases when it's not clean to this extent, but we do clean the building. And I'm sure that you'll please see it clean.
And Willowbrook wasn't the only New York State institution where an attempt was made at cosmetic cover-up. It also happened at Letchworth Village, another facility involved in the original expose 10 years ago. In every important measure of quality, 1972, Letchworth matched Willowbrook in the magnitude of its failure. It was another unsanitary warehouse for the retarded. It is a much different, cleaner place today. But by coming 2 days later than expected, we discovered the administration here was also trying to play to the cameras. Residents had been taken on unscheduled field trips to reduce evidence of overcrowding. Every shower in the place had gotten a brand new curtain, and hundreds of gay decorations had been placed on the walls. Letchworth even received a special appropriation to buy gravestones for residents buried under their institutional numbers 15 or 20 years ago. One parent was angered by the apparent insincerity of the cleanup action.
We got an awful lot of painting done because we were coming. We got a lot of extra supplies for different things, an awful lot of overtime, which of course we can't get every time, and a few things that I didn't like about it.
Are you saying that some of these improvements were done for the benefit of the camera?
Yes. You should have been around here for 2 weeks. It was incredible what went on here for 2 weeks. I thought it was phony. And, you know, it was backfired against the residents. So I was furious. I was there, and I still am.
At this point, I invited Letchworth's deputy director into the conversation.
He knows me, and he knows that I speak very frankly.
Now, her point is that many of the cosmetic improvements were done for our benefit. Is that true?
About 2 weeks ago, we received an appropriation from the division of the budget of some $450,000. It's a recent approval. We've begun...
Let's be frank. They knew 2 weeks ago we were coming. Everyone thought we were coming this Tuesday. Are many of these cosmetic changes done for our benefit?
We've attempted to put our best foot forward in terms of your visit. To certainly, if we needed to do some sprucing up, some patching of the painting, some additional plants here and there. We've received certain things.
So if I call every week and tell you I'm coming every week,
That's
it
right,
might be a permanent improvement.
I know.
Putting aside the issue of sincerity, and forgetting at least for the moment the clumsy cleanup attempts, Letchworth, as well as Willowbrook, has been greatly improved over the last 10 years. And in varying degrees, that has been the story all across the country. In places like Dixon, Illinois, for example, the big facility in President Reagan's hometown. And in Pennhurst, the institution serving southeastern Pennsylvania. And in various Texas state facilities, among many others. The combined pressures of continuous news media exposure. Major federal lawsuit.
I feel like a lot of them have gotten better, but there's still work that could be done. Maybe more training for employees, more, you know. But this was 10 years from the Willowbrook documentary, which I think was in 72. So, you know, this still isn't up to date, and then the next one will be 25 years, so.
And the availability of Medicaid money have dramatically changed these places, hopefully forever. In Willowbrook, perhaps the most striking change is the absence, or at least reduction in overcrowding. At the time of our original report, it had a population of well over 5,000 residents. Now there are only about 1,300, and the federal court has ordered even that number be reduced in the near future. Actually, New York is just one of 28 states sued in major litigation to improve conditions and rights for the retarded. In the 10 states listed here, the lawsuits have succeeded in bringing about improvements. In each case so far decided, the federal court found that the retarded had a right to much more personal care and treatment than that generally available in the large state institutions. By federal court order, the filth and the horrible stench that once characterized Willowbrook has largely been washed away, and most of the residents have clothes on now. The direct care staff, the attendants, appear much more involved than they were in 1972, and there are many more of them. At least in some buildings, many seem to care about the people President Kennedy once referred to as the victims of fate. There are still serious problems, however. Example, all of these residents are legally entitled to 6 hours of education and training every day. But critics charge that during the remaining hours, the residents are left to sit around doing nothing. About 20% attend a vocational workshop on the grounds of the institution. Bernard found Joseph, an old friend, in the workshop.
Do you remember Bernard? Yeah. That's right. What do you remember about Bernard? What do you remember about Bernard? That's right.
Critics claim that people like Joseph, if they had received appropriate education and training, could now be living outside these big institutions, in a much more normal environment. Early in the evening of our first visit, we returned to Bernard's old home, building number 7, where the residents had been returned after their unusual walk. Like the other buildings, it was cleaner and much less crowded than it was 10 years ago, but it was still Willowbrook, a boring, frightening, dulling world, which many experts say encourages the severely retarded to abuse themselves or to hurt one another.
What you have to understand about self-abuse is that it's not a consequence of being retarded. Simply because you're retarded doesn't mean you're going to abuse yourself. Most self-abuse is as a result of boredom. These people have been on these wards with absolutely nothing to do for almost all their lives, and as a result they've resorted to the only kind of stimulation they can think of, and that is stimulation by hitting themselves.
Because many of these residents are unable to feed themselves, the staff has to feed them. 10 years ago, the average feeding time was 3 minutes per patient. I asked Dr. Michael Wilkins at the time what the consequences were of that kind of haste.
How much time would be needed to do a job adequately? The same amount of time that your children and my children would want to have to eat breakfast.
What's the consequence of 3 minutes per meal per child?
The consequence is death from pneumonia.
There are fewer residents now, so eating time has increased, but the situation is far from ideal. With enough personal attention, for instance, virtually all retarded people can be taught to use utensils and properly feed themselves. More personalized care would also prevent tragic accidents. In September, for example, a resident on a soft food diet was choking because he'd been fed a solid meal by mistake. When the staff tried to stop the choking with the use of this type special machine, they discovered the suction tube had a hole in it. The machine would not work. The resident choked to death. So as you've seen, critical problems still exist at Willowbrook, and lawyers for the residents are arguing right now in federal court that much more needs to be done.
I think that probably what we've seen today is the cleanest day ever able to get Willowbrook, and that's just not good enough. And if we need any better demonstration for removing people from institutions once and for all, it's seeing the best that they have to offer, their best foot forward.
Okay, but was what we saw really a cover-up? I mean, I wouldn't want, if I knew some important person was coming over, naturally to spruce my place up a bit.
What happened at Willowbrook, Letchworth, and other New York State institutions, though, was more than sprucing up. It was dishonesty, an attempt to deceive me and everyone watching this program. This, for instance, is a copy of testimony given last month under oath in federal court by a staff supervisor at one of the New York institutions. It describes in detail how after waiting for at least 8 months, the residents were finally given decent furniture and clothing, and how critical repairs were made, not for the benefit of the mentally retarded, but in an attempt to fool our cameras and ultimately you, the viewing public. They just got caught. But the more basic question is, where have the tens of thousands of retarded people gone since leaving those big state institutions?
I visited the state institution for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit.
After all the television and newspaper exposés of the late 60s and early 70s, and after all the federal and state lawsuits, virtually everyone agreed. The old way was the wrong way. But what now? Most administrators, government officials, and the public service unions involved say clean up the big facilities and cut them down to size. Instead of allowing them to hold thousands, build them instead for hundreds. By reducing the scale, most of the problems will go away. But did they? Item, the Bronx Developmental Center, completed in 1977.
It was designed then as a regional center, a transitional facility. It was also supposed to be a resource for the surrounding community programs. But according to this report filed by the New York State Senate last January, after the death of a resident here, quote, this facility has had a history of neglect, indifference, and broken promises, and appears to be outmoded and obsolete before its time, end quote.
It was originally considered an architectural showpiece until somebody discovered that these steps and angles and levels were basically unsuited for severely retarded people. Example, they put a neat balcony on each of the floors, but they only put a 3-foot wall around it.
Nobody saw her, and all we know is we found that her daughter was dead.
Elena was the Agavino's 23-year-old daughter. 2 years ago, when she became just too much for her mom to handle at home, they placed her in this modern facility. Last year, though, she somehow wandered away from her living area, walked out onto the then unprotected 5th-floor balcony, and fell to her death.
Let's face it, if she was being watched, it could have been avoided. She didn't have to die the way she did.
Making an unannounced visit to the Bronx Center, we discovered all kinds of serious structural problems. The floors have sunk, exposing electrical wiring, and the flimsy plasterboard walls make absolutely no sense for the handicapped. According to testimony in federal court, these repair crews were brought in by the state in yet another frantic effort to hide existing problems from our cameras. But despite the obvious cover-up here, this type facility is cleaner, smaller, and more modern than the big old institutions. The question is it really better? Anthony Rio spent 5 years at Willowbrook before being transferred here. His mom told us the kind of help he needs, but is not getting.
Is he progressing?
I would say kind of stagnating. He's not getting any place or progressing per se. Because when you have a staff shortage, you cannot meet program goals. If you have a program for chewing or swallowing or brushing teeth, and you have 2 people who are taking care of 8 or 10 people, you don't have the time to dedicate to each individual. So you don't get the care that you need in the programs.
The vast majority of retarded people live at home with their families or in some other community setting because they have no intense medical or psychiatric problems. Indeed, there's a considerable group of parents and other experts who maintain that no retarded person should ever be placed in an institution.
Retarded people are not dangerous. They have no contagious disease. They've broken no laws. There's no need for them to be in an institution.
For the mildly retarded, people like Fred Parker or his friend Herb Nash, almost no special arrangements are necessary. Although he was once a resident of Willowbrook, once out of the institution, Fred received special education and training. He now holds a job and lives in this apartment provided by Catholic Charities.
I don't worry about nobody bothering me. I just go out and enjoy my life like everybody else. And pay for my food, pay for my clothes, and do everything for myself.
These moderately retarded men and women need more help than Freddie Parker does in such daily skills as cooking and managing their money. They get it in this small group home in Manhattan, sponsored by the Young Adult Institute. This community residence and more than 5,000 like it across the country have been opened in the last decade. Without question, they are the most important legacy of all the exposés and lawsuits. But opposition to the community care concept is mounting on several fronts. With tens of thousands of higher-functioning mentally retarded people already successfully relocated in these community residences, some politicians and professionals are saying basically that enough is enough. In other words, that those mentally retarded people still living inside these institutions are so handicapped they can't possibly be cared for adequately in a home-like setting.
But is that really the case? This is the Community Resource Center, home for 6 severely retarded and handicapped people. These were the toughest cases, those almost inevitably consigned to live out their lives inside the institution. And look around. These people are doing great. Aren't doing great. You're doing beautiful.
Oh, yeah. You are beautiful. Take Marcus Pagan as an example. Going to this community.
Okay, that moment was just really, really sweet. And it kind of shows with the right support and the right tools how people, even with severe handicaps, can live in society instead of being, well, pushed away and aside like they were in a lot of these facilities. And the fact that this was still going on and things weren't, things got better in the 80s. I'm hoping by the 25-year mark it's a lot better. And there's just a few things that need to be done because I still think we're not there yet as far as by 2021 for how people should be treated in these facilities and outside these facilities. But I think we're getting there.
He spent 13 years in Willowbrook. Like many patients denied proper physical therapy, his legs contracted, to the point where this retarded youngster had difficulty even sitting up in a wheelchair. Since coming here, however, he's had a series of operations to correct the consequences of years of institutional neglect. Marcus has his own room now, and friends, and he attends a special day program run by United Cerebral Palsy. One of the most important features of these small group homes is that they are relatively inexpensive to build. 10 years ago, Michigan decided to invest in a network of 100 small community homes in the Macomb, Oakland area just outside of Detroit. The state reasoned correctly that this more personal care, while costing about the same tax money, provides a far more human, normal place for a retarded person to live. But being placed in a smaller facility located somewhere in a community isn't always a guarantee of a better life. Example. All across the country, private nursing homes are springing up just outside the gates of the big state institutions for the mentally retarded. It's a marriage of convenience. The private nursing homes want the Medicaid business, while the states need a quick fix, an easy way to reduce institutional overcrowding. But according to many critics, some nursing homes are no better than the institutions the mentally retarded are supposedly leaving behind.
Here in Denton, Texas, for instance, a grand jury has just indicted the state's largest nursing home chain, charging that poorly trained employees were responsible for the death of a 4-year-old blind and retarded child.
What exactly happened to the child, allegedly?
What exactly happened to the child, in my opinion, is that he was not medicated properly. He had a seizure, and as a result of that seizure, he fell out of a wheelchair and strangled to death.
Strangled on what?
On a strap that straps him in a wheelchair. He's unable to move at all.
Could you tell me exactly what the corporation has been indicted for?
Yesterday, they've been indicted for involuntary manslaughter, which in Texas is a reckless act. It's a third-degree felony, and corporations that's punishable by a $20,000 fine if they're convicted in the state of Texas.
Even though under indictment, the nursing home still houses 65 retarded children. The youngest apparently spend most of their time in bed. The slightly older are cared for in day rooms, not unlike the institutions of 10 or 15 years ago. Having started their lives in a place like this, the odds are that these children will grow up and die in a similar environment.
In reality, people in nursing homes are just as cut off from the communities as people in any kind of institutions. They are not prepared to move on. They're not given the kind of, they don't have the kind of experiences to enable them to be more independent. They don't have any more contact in the community than they did as residents of the state centers. And there is no mechanism to move them on. The people that were moved out of the state institutions into nursing homes are all still there.
What did this say, Greg?
Hundreds of thousands of retarded children now receive public school educations. It's a program that allows them to live at home with their families. But like most community programs, this one has limitations. Because she's reached the age of 21, Kathy Woolsfield of DeKalb, Illinois, is legally too old to continue these classes at the Special Education Association. And her father is worried about her future.
What do you think you'll do then with Kathy now that she is so 21?
I don't know what we're going to do, to be honest with you. And it isn't fair to her. Like these 15 years of education, to see them just wasted away. If there was an incentive to advance her, maybe eventually she could take care of herself and live in a home training place, you know what I mean, the residence.
There is, in your opinion, no appropriate community residence for her now?
No. Not in this county, to the best of my knowledge.
The closest institution to the Woolsfield family home is located in nearby Dixon, Illinois.
What about the institution? Is that an alternative you would consider?
Institution, no. We wouldn't put her in an institution, no way. I'm a farmer, and I take care of my livestock better than they take care of the human beings out there. Our representatives and senators can sleep at night knowing that that goes on.
But many parents disagree with Mr. Woolsfield. Emmett Threadgill is the spokesman for a group of Texas parents, for instance, who are so fearful of the problems with community programs, they are fighting to keep their children in the state institutions.
The state schools, as we're operating in Texas today, are permanent. And when we die, if you look at my gray hair, I'm in my 70s, where life is approaching it, we'd like to know that when we pass out of this picture, that our child is right here, and that there'll always be somebody to take care of him as long as he lives.
See, now this actually makes me think about my own personal, family. Because I have so much going on with my grandmother and her daughter, where her daughter's gonna go when she passes away. So, hold on.
That's the most important thing of all.
One of the reasons for the severe shortage of good community homes is the serious, sometimes violent opposition to them from people who live in the neighborhoods where proposed homes are to be located.
These ruins are all that's left of a home designed to provide a community residence for 10 retarded adults. Anger, ignorance, and arson destroyed their dream. Plans are being made to rebuild, but plans must also be made to educate the public about groundless fears and misguided prejudice.
I think the real change that we want to see is that we all see the retarded as being more normal than abnormal, and that we welcome them into our society and don't continually try to segregate them out.
Today, Dr. Michael Wilkins, the man who first brought the Willowbrook story to my attention, is a neighborhood doctor in Kansas City.
What we want is that people in residential neighborhoods can see that the retarded living among them isn't a threat to them. In fact, it can be a real enriching aspect of their life if they only would get to know them.
Next week, the United States Supreme Court will hear arguments in a very important case concerning the issue of whether or not the retarded have a constitutional right to care, treatment, and protection from harm. But whatever the court decides, it's really the way all of us think and feel and act toward the retarded that will ultimately determine whether or not they get the same chance to live the normal life we want our own kids to have.
Thank you. We'll be right back after this.